It all started with a scream, sharp, sudden, and completely out of place in a neighborhood like Pine Ridge. Diego Rivera had just finished hauling a box of dishes into his sister's new kitchen when the sound split the air, sending his pulse sky high. He didn't think. He ran. Instinct kicked in before reason had the chance. Pine Ridge was the kind of place with pastel mailboxes, lawn flamingos, an HOA board that thought of itself as a miniature government. But none of that mattered when Diego hit the pavement, sprinting toward the basketball court where the scream came from. A boy, 16, maybe 17, was lying flat on the court, chest still, lips a chilling shade of blue. Kids were frozen around him, one sobbing, "He's not breathing." Diego dropped to his knees, already calling commands like second nature. Cardiac arrest. Call 911. Chest compression starting. His hands went to work with a rhythm honed by 10 years as a paramedic. He didn't live here, but that didn't matter. That boy was dying, and Diego was his only shot. Then came the words that would change everything. "Get your hands off that boy or I swear I'll cuff you myself." They didn't come from a cop. They came from a man in cargo shorts, mirrored sunglasses, and a plastic badge that read, HOA Security Chief. Diego barely looked up. "Medical emergency. I'm licensed. Go wait for EMS." But the man didn't move. He advanced. His name was Rick Masterson, and he wasn't interested in saving a life. He was interested in rules, property lines, resident status, who belonged and who didn't. And in that moment, the boy on the court didn't just need oxygen. He needed protection from the very people who claimed they were keeping the neighborhood safe. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened next? It could happen anywhere. Diego didn't stop. He couldn't. The AED was charging. The boy's pulse still missing and every second counted. But Rick Masterson didn't care. He stepped closer, towering above Diego like he was about to raid a cartel, not hover over a dying kid. "You're trespassing," Rick barked. "Unauthorized medical practice. You're endangering him." Diego snapped his head up. "I'm a paramedic. Licensed. IDs in my wallet. What I don't have is time for your HOA nonsense." Still, Rick didn't flinch. He unhooked a pair of handcuffs from his belt and held them up like a threat. Last warning. And then it happened. As the AED signaled it was ready, as Diego leaned forward to press the pads to the boy's chest, Rick lunged, grabbed him by the arm, yanked him back mid-compression. "You're under citizen's arrest," he shouted, forcing Diego face down on the court as the boy's limp body slumped once more. A chorus of chaos exploded around them when the teen screamed he was saving him. Another tried to pull Rick off, sobbing and swinging fists. Someone else called the cops again, but it was too late. The AED blinked uselessly on the pavement. No pulse. No breath. The boy, his name was Jalen, flatlined before EMS even arrived. Diego, still in cuffs, sat shaking on the asphalt when the first squad car pulled up 6 minutes too late. The officer took one look at Diego's trauma bag, the blinking AED, his open wallet with the EMT license tucked inside, and then turned a hard stare toward Rick. "You arrested a paramedic?" he asked, voice sharp with disbelief. Rick stood straighter, puffed up with false authority. "He wasn't authorized to be here. This is private property. There are procedures." The officer didn't even respond. He just walked over and quietly uncuffed Diego. No one said anything else, because there was nothing left to say. By nightfall, the footage was everywhere. A teenager dead. A paramedic cuffed mid-CPR. A plastic badge security guard barking about trespassing, while a life slipped away on camera. The video, taken by one of the kids, hit Reddit first, under a thread titled, "HOA Psycho Arrests Paramedic During CPR, Kid Dies." It exploded. 10,000 upvotes in hours. By morning, it was front-page news. Hashtags like hashtag CPR arrest and hashtag Justice for Diego trended across platforms. Commentators on cable news tore into the HOA. People demanded Rick's arrest. Parents cried on morning shows. EMTs across the country posted photos in solidarity. But the clip that went the most viral, the one that stuck, was simple. Rick yelling, "He doesn't live here," and Diego shouting back, "He might not live at all." Diego didn't want the spotlight. He didn't want applause or internet fame. He wanted justice. And he knew exactly who to call. His older brother, Diego Rivera, wasn't just family. He was one of the most ruthless civil rights attorneys in the state. The kind of guy who didn't just win cases. He humiliated institutions. When Diego explained what happened, there was silence on the line. Then Elio said calmly, "We're going to bury them." The very next morning, Elio held a press conference outside the hospital where Diego had been treated for bruised wrists and shock. Cameras swarmed. Mics extended. Diego stood beside his brother, face tight, jaw locked. Elio spoke loud and clear. "My brother wasn't just assaulted. He was prevented from doing his job. He was stopped from saving a life. And we intend to hold every last person accountable." Reporters fired questions. Flashbulbs popped. But when someone finally asked Diego what he wanted to say to the HOA, he didn't hesitate. "I hope they enjoyed their power trip," he said. "Because the real authorities, they're coming." The tide turned fast. By lunchtime, national networks were broadcasting clips of the press conference. Diego's quiet, grief-stricken face beside Elio's commanding presence hit people hard. It wasn't just a tragic story anymore. It was a reckoning. This wasn't about HOA drama or bureaucratic overreach. It was about power used like a weapon and a kid who died because of it. Diego couldn't sleep. He sat at his sister's kitchen table, staring into a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. His wrists still throbbed from the cuffs. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jalen's face, blue-lipped, gasping, and Rick's smug expression as he dragged Diego off mid-compression. His sister moved quietly around the kitchen, trying not to speak, but the air between them was heavy with everything unspoken. That afternoon, Elio arrived like a storm, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, briefcase in hand. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. He just dropped a folder on the table and said, "We're suing the HOA. $10 million minimum. Wrongful detainment. Obstruction of emergency services. Negligent homicide, depending on what the autopsy says. Emotional trauma. The works." Diego didn't respond at first. He just nodded slowly, eyes locked on a crack in the table. "Good," Elio said, "because this isn't just about you anymore." That evening, Diego agreed to speak again, this time at the hospital steps. Reporters gathered. Supporters showed up with handmade signs. "CPR isn't a crime. Justice for Jalen." When Diego stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell silent. "I didn't know Jalen," he said, voice rough, "but I knew he was dying, and I knew I could help. That's what I'm trained to do. But instead of being allowed to save him, I was treated like a criminal." The clip went nuclear. The public went ballistic, and the HOA started to panic. Inside the sleek, glass-walled office of the Pine Ridge HOA, panic was spreading like wildfire. Karen Whitlow, the long-serving president of the board, called an emergency meeting. She stood at the head of a mahogany table, flanked by retirees and real estate investors who now looked more like deer in headlights. "We are not to blame for what happened," she insisted, voice clipped and defensive. "Rick Masterson acted in accordance with our protocol. We are not a police force. We're a community organization." But that defense cracked faster than anyone expected. By that evening, an anonymous board member, someone known only as Tom, leaked internal emails to a local reporter. The messages were damning. One from Karen to Rick read, "No unauthorized personnel during crisis. We must control liability and PR optics." Another, even colder, stated, "We don't care if they're licensed. If they don't live here, they don't touch our residents." The internet exploded. Commentators called it the privatization of death. And the phrase stuck. Elio didn't hesitate. The leaked emails became Exhibit A in a newly amended lawsuit, now naming both Karen and Rick as individual defendants. The damages increased. The story hit every major outlet. Reporters camped outside HOA headquarters. Protesters gathered at the gates of Pine Ridge, some dressed in EMT uniforms, others holding CPR dummies painted red. One sign read, "He had a heartbeat until you stopped it." Inside the neighborhood, residents were at war with each other. Some were furious about the media attention, worried about property values. Others demanded Karen's resignation. Rick? Nowhere to be found, but he wasn't quiet. He made a guest appearance on a fringe podcast, still in his ridiculous tactical vest, claiming, "I did what I had to do." That man was a stranger. The clip made it to national TV, right next to Jalen's memorial, and public outrage hit a whole new level. The outrage turned into action. Within days, a representative from the Department of Justice confirmed they were opening a formal investigation into the Pine Ridge HOA and its internal policies. A local city councilman proposed legislation aimed at preventing private organizations from impersonating first responders. People were already calling it Jalen's Law. Insurance companies began re-evaluating coverage for the entire neighborhood. Buyers pulled out of home sales. Realtors whispered about the community, like it was radioactive. But Diego, he didn't care about the headlines. He cared about the boy he couldn't save. He sat on his sister's porch every evening, staring at nothing. The guilt clung to him like a second skin. Elio kept him informed. Legal motions filed, depositions scheduled, media requests flooding in. But Diego barely responded. It wasn't about strategy for him. It was about that kid. About those last 5 minutes. About the way his hands had trembled after the cuffs came off. Then he got a call. Jalen's parents wanted to meet. They sat in a quiet corner of the hospital chapel. Patrice, Jalen's mother, clutched her son's old basketball jersey like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Do you think he had a chance?" she asked, eyes locked on Diego's. He didn't lie. "Yes," he said quietly. "I really do." Her husband, a man with kind but weary eyes, just nodded. "Then don't let them bury this," he said. Elio amended the lawsuit that same afternoon. The HOA president and Rick were now personally listed. The damages soared. Reporters circled the HOA offices like sharks. CPR dummies painted in red blocked the front steps. One banner read, "You stopped his heartbeat." But the moment that hit hardest, a new paramedic came forward. A woman named Denise. And her story? It was almost identical. Denise's story cracked everything wide open. She came forward quietly at first. No cameras, no interviews. Just a sworn statement, delivered straight to Elio. Months before Jalen's death, she'd been dispatched to Pine Ridge for a heat stroke emergency near the lakefront. But the gate volunteer wouldn't let her through. "You're not in the system," he'd told her. "Wait for verification." She lost 6 precious minutes, sitting outside that gate. Lights flashing, siren muted. The man she was trying to reach lived, but barely, and it haunted her. Elio took her statement and filed it immediately as a supplement to the lawsuit. But Denise wasn't done. She also had access to something else. Screenshots from a private HOA message board. And what they showed was chilling. Threads between board members and volunteers debating liability during medical situations. One post from Rick himself read, "Even if they're trying to help, if they're not in the system, they're a threat." Another from Karen said, "The problem with responders is they make us look like amateurs." There was no mention of saving lives. No talk of compassion. Just control. Gate codes and rules and fear. The screenshots leaked to the press. Public fury became white hot. A city council emergency hearing was scheduled. Local leaders demanded a criminal investigation. People picketed outside Karen's house. Rick hadn't been seen in days, but then he resurfaced, of course, on another fringe podcast. Sunglasses indoors. Tactical vest. "I did my duty," he declared. "That guy was a trespasser. I'm the reason this community is safe." The host nodded. But even that crowd wasn't buying it anymore. Back at home, Diego watched the clip, expression unreadable. Then he turned off the TV and sat in silence. Rick hadn't just made a mistake. He'd made a choice. And that choice had cost the kid his life. The community had had enough. An emergency town hall was called, held in the same Pine Ridge Community Center, where holiday craft fairs and HOA potlucks used to take place. But this night, it was packed with fury. Residents stood shoulder to shoulder, faces tight with frustration, grief, and disbelief. And for the first time since the incident, Karen Whitlow showed up in public. flanked by 2 lawyers, dressed in a stiff navy suit like she was prepping for a courtroom rather than a conversation. She stepped on stage and tried to speak. She barely got 2 sentences out. A man near the front shouted, "I've bought a house, not a dictatorship." A woman, tears in her voice, held up a framed photo. "That was my son's best friend," she said. "Jalen could have been mine." The board tried to maintain order. It was no use. The air was electric with righteous anger. Someone passed around a clipboard. By the time the meeting ended, over half the residents had signed a petition to recall the entire board. Meanwhile, Elio got a phone call that stopped him cold. It was from the office of a U.S. senator. They wanted to meet with Diego, wanting to testify at a congressional hearing about what happened, about how a trained paramedic had been handcuffed for saving a life, about how a teenager died in broad daylight while grown adults debated HOA rules. Elio didn't even wait. He called Diego that night. "They want you in D.C., he said. "They want the truth. From you." Diego was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm not a politician." "No," Elio said. "You're something better. You're the guy who never stopped trying to do the right thing." And across the country, people were finally listening. Back in Pine Ridge, the cracks had turned into a collapse. Someone spray-painted, "You let him die," across the front doors of the HOA office. Rick's car, parked miles away at what turned out to be his cousin's house, was egged and keyed. Karen stopped appearing in public altogether. The community pool was padlocked due to safety concerns. But everyone knew it was because fights had broken out at the last board meeting. Half the residents were openly talking about moving. The other half were demanding blood. Then came the final blow. A second paramedic came forward. Denise had been the first, but this man had video. He'd responded to a fall injury in the Pine Ridge Dog Park months earlier. Security had stopped him, delayed him. He filmed the whole thing on his dash cam. The flashing lights, the stammering volunteer with a clipboard, the minutes ticking by while someone bled from a head wound. The patient survived, but barely. That footage, combined with Diego's case, Denise's testimony, the message board screenshots, and Rick's bizarre public rants, it wasn't just a pattern. It was a system, a dangerous, unchecked system pretending to be about safety. And people were done pretending. When the congressional hearing was announced, Diego prepared quietly. Elio helped with a statement, but Diego's words didn't come from notes. They came from the part of him that never let go of Jalen's final gasp. "I had the training. I had the tools. I had the knowledge," Diego said, his voice calm but cutting. "And I was stopped by someone with no authority, no experience, just a title and a badge made out of ego." The committee room was silent. Then applause. Real bipartisan applause. A month later, a bill was introduced, Diego's Law, a federal offense to interfere with licensed emergency responders. Change had begun, and it had a name. The verdict came down like thunder. The courtroom was packed, shoulder to shoulder with EMTs, nurses, firefighters, and reporters. Diego sat at the plaintiff's table, still calm, but holding himself like someone bracing for impact. Across from him sat Karen, her posture rigid, her face pale beneath too much makeup. Rick's chair sat empty. Word was he'd gone into hiding, showing up only on obscure podcasts to rant about government overreach and how real patriots don't answer subpoenas. But none of that mattered now. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman who'd seen it all, looked weary as she read through the evidence. The leaked emails, the AED footage, the message board threads about threats in the system, the timeline showing exactly when compression stopped, because of Rick, and when Jalen flatlined, because they didn't start again in time. Elio built the case like a fortress. One of his final moves? Playing a video of the incident with no commentary. Just the cold, rhythmic beep of the 80 and the silence that followed it. When the screen faded to black, no one moved. Even the jury sat frozen. The decision came fast. Guilty on all civil counts. The Pine Ridge HOA was ordered to pay $10 million in damages to Diego, plus another $2 million in punitive damages for willful negligence and emotional trauma. On top of that, the judge issued a court order, Pine Ridge was to immediately disband its security program and was permanently barred from employing any enforcement personnel without certified state training and oversight. Outside the courthouse, Diego stood beside Elio as reporters fired questions. He didn't give a speech, just the truth. This wasn't justice, he said. It was accountability. Jalen should still be here, and I should have never been arrested for trying to keep him alive. One last breath, and the system finally exhaled. Pine Ridge was never the same again. In the days after the verdict, the neighborhood that once prided itself on manicured lawns and quiet evenings became a symbol of arrogance, of unchecked authority, of what happens when rules are used to silence reason. The $10 million judgment sent shockwaves through HOA boards across the country. Emergency meetings were held. Security protocols were rewritten overnight. Legal consultants were suddenly very, very busy. Karen Whitlow resigned before the week was out. Her resignation email went out at 3 a.m., cold defensive, blaming media hysteria and outsider influence. No one cared. Her house hit the market the next day. Within hours, someone graffitied her sidewalk and read, "You let him die." Rick Masterson was found hiding on a rural property 2 counties away, holed up with a radio scanner, canned beans, and a stack of printed HOA bylaws. His arrest wasn't dramatic. Just 2 U.S. Marshals walking him calmly to a cruiser, but the footage still went viral. No apologies, no remorse, but now no power. The HOA board dissolved itself in disgrace. A temporary community council took over. Teachers, veterans, and a retired paramedic. Their first act? Eliminate the security program. Their second? Install a memorial plaque at the basketball court. It read, "This court didn't just lose a game. It lost a future." Diego didn't take a vacation. He didn't move out of state or disappear from the public eye. He went back to work. The same job, the same uniform, the same quiet mission to keep people breathing. His first call back was a fainting spell in a grocery store, an elderly woman, stable and alert by the time they reached the ER. She flirted with him on the way. He smiled, and just for a second, he felt like he could breathe again, too.